So you act as though God exists.
Yep.
And in addition, I've heard you say that I act as though God exists, that I can't really be an atheist.
So far it seems that.
Right, yeah.
We'll see.
The night is young.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I'm not really an atheist. I've heard you say this. So that
well, some of you is.
Well, if I were really an atheist, I would be far more poorly behaved than in fact I am. Right? I would be like Raskolnikov committing murders and assuming there was nothing wrong with it.
It would be more likely, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
wait, that's a big distinction.
I need to know.
Be more likely.
What was that?
It's a big distinction. That you would is very different than it would be more likely. Taking the safety off the gun is not the same thing as shooting it, right?
Yeah.
The temptations laid open to Raskolnikov would be more at hand.
Okay.
Just as they were to him.
So, in what sense do you mean? What is the God that you act as though he, she, it exists? And what is the God-shaped thing I must have in my life to prevent me from being a, quote, real atheist?
Well, okay, first of all, I have to point out that there's no possible way I can answer both those questions in 2 minutes.
Well, it's the same question. I mean,
yeah,
what do you mean by God?
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you some of the things that I mean by God. I'm going to read some things that I wrote because it's so complicated that I'm not sure that I can just spin it off the top of my head, and so you'll have to excuse me. So, and what I'm going to do is sort of paint a picture by highlighting different things. So now I already made one point here. I made the point that part of the conception of God that underlies the Western ethos is the notion that whatever God is expressed in the truthful speech that rectifies pathological hierarchies. And that isn't all it does. It also confronts the chaos of being itself and generates habitable order. That's the metaphysical proposition. And that's best conceptualized as at least one element of God. And so I would think about it as a transcendent reality that's only observable across the longest of time frames, the longest of iterated time frames, to your point. So here's some propositions, and they're complicated, and they need to be unpacked. So I'm just going to read them, and that'll have to do for the time being. So God is how we imaginatively and collectively represent the existence and action of consciousness across time, as the most real aspects of existence manifest themselves across the longest of time frames, but are not necessarily apprehensible as objects in the here and now. So what that means in some sense is that you have conceptions of reality built into your biological and metaphysical structure that are a consequence of processes of evolution that occurred over unbelievably vast expanses of time, and that structure your perception of reality in ways that it wouldn't be structured if you only lived for the amount of time that you're going to live. And that's also part of the problem of deriving values from facts, because you're evanescent and you can't derive the right values from the facts that portray themselves to you in your lifespan, which is why you have a biological structure that's like 3.5 billion years old. So God is that which eternally dies and is reborn in the pursuit of higher being and truth. That's a fundamental element of hero mythology. God is the highest value in the hierarchy of values. That's another way of looking at it. God is what calls and what responds in the eternal call to adventure. God is the voice of conscience. God is the source of judgment and mercy and guilt. God is the future to which we make sacrifices and something akin to the transcendental repository of reputation. Here's a cool one if you're an evolutionary biologist. God is that which selects among men in the eternal hierarchy of men. So, men arrange themselves into hierarchies, and then men rise in the hierarchy. And there's principles that are important that determine the probability of their rise, and those principles aren't tyrannical power. They're something like the ability to articulate truth and the ability to be competent and the ability to make appropriate moral judgments. And if you can do that in a given situation, then all the other men will vote you up the hierarchy, so to speak, and that will radically increase your reproductive fitness. And the operation of that process across long expanses of time looks to me like it's codified in something like the notion of God the Father. It's also the same thing that makes men attractive to women, Because women peel off the top of the male hierarchy, and the question is, what should be at the top of the hierarchy? And the answer right now is tyranny as part of the patriarchy, but the real answer is something more like the ability to use truthful speech in the service of, let's say, well-being. And so that's something that operates across tremendous expanses of time, and it plays a role in the selection for survival itself, which makes it a fundamental reality.
Jordan, if I can I just cut in here with one question.
I'll stop with that for now.
What? So I was not hearing in that list of attributes a God who could care if anyone masturbated.